The Illuminism of Adam Weishaupt. But the Illuminism of Lyon was destined soon to have a world-wide and ineradicable hold on the Masonry of the world by means of an adept far more able than Saint-Martin or any of his associates. This was Adam Weishaupt, a professor of canon law in the University of Munich. I shall detain you a while to consider this remarkable individual, who more than any of the atheists that have arisen in Masonry has been the cause of the success of its agencies in controlling the fate of the world since his day. Had Weishaupt not lived, Masonry may have ceased to be a power after the reaction consequent on the First French Revolution. He gave it a form and character which caused it to outlive that reaction, to energize to the present day, and which will cause it to advance until its final conflict with Christianity must determine whether Christ or Satan shall reign on this earth to the end. Voltaire's will to do God and man injury was as strong as that of Weishaupt. His disciples d'Alembert, Diderot, Damilaville, Condorcet, and the rest were as fully determined as he was to eradicate Christianity. But they desired in its stead a system with only a mitigated antipathy for monarchy, and which might have tolerated for a long time such kings as Frederick of Prussia and such empresses as Catherine of Russia. But the hatred for God and all form of worship, and the determination to found a universal republic on the lines of communism, was on the part of Weishaupt a settled sentiment. Possessed of a rare power of organization, an education in law which made him a preeminent teacher in its highest faculty, an extended knowledge of men and things, a command over himself, a repute for external morality, and finally a position calculated to win able disciples, Weishaupt employed for 50 years after the death of Voltaire his whole life and energies in the one work of perfecting secret associations to accomplish by deep deceit and by force, when that should be practical, the ruin of the existing order of religion, civilization, and government, in order to plant in its stead his own system of atheism and socialism. He found contemporary Masonry well adapted for his ends. His object was to extend it as far as possible as a means of seducing men away from Christianity. He well knew that Masonry and the Church were in mortal conflict, and that the moment a man became a Mason, he, that instant, became excommunicated. He lost the grace of God. He passed into a state of hostility to the Church. He ceased to approach the sacraments. He was constituted in a state of rebellion. He forfeited his liberty to unknown superiors. He took a dreadful oath, perhaps many, not to reveal the secrets then or at any aftertime to be committed to his keeping. And finally, he placed himself amongst men, all of whom were in his own position, and in whose society it was possible and easy for the astute disciples of Weishaupt to lead him farther on the road to ruin. Weishaupt's view, then, was first to entice men into Masonry, into the lowest degree. A great gain for evil was thus at once obtained. But a man, though in Masonry, may not be willing to become an atheist and a socialist for some time at least. He may have in his heart a profound conviction that a God existed, and some hope left of returning to that God at or before his death. He may have entered Masonry for purposes of ambition, for motives of vanity, from mere lightness of character. He may continue his prayers and refuse, if a Catholic, to give up the Mother of God and some practice of piety loved by him from his youth. But Masonry was a capital system to wean a man gradually away from all these things. It did not at once deny the existence of God, nor at once attack the Christian dispensation. It commenced by giving the Christian idea of God an easy and, under the semblance of respect, an almost imperceptible shake. It swore by the name of God in all its oaths. It called Him, however, not a creator, only an architect, the great architect of the universe. It carefully avoided all mention of Christ, of the adorable Trinity, of the unity of the faith, or of any faith. It protested a respect for the convictions of every man, for the idolatrous Parsi, for the Mohammedan, for the heretic, the schismatic, the Catholic. By and by it gave, in higher degrees, a ruder shock to the belief in the deity and a gradual inducement to favor naturalism. This it did gradually, imperceptibly, but effectually. Now, to a man who meditated the vast designs of social and religious destruction contemplated by Weishaupt, Masonry, especially the Masonry of his period, was the most effective means that could be conceived. In its midst, therefore, he planted his disciples, well versed in his system. These consisted of 3 classes, each class having subdivisions, and all of which were high degrees of Masonry. The first class of Illuminati was that of preparation. It consisted of 2 degrees, namely, the degree of novice and that of Minerval. The Minervals formed the great body of the order, and were under the direction of certain chiefs, who themselves were subjected to other agencies invisible to those instructed by themselves. Weishaupt instructed the teachers of the Minervals to propose each year to their scholars some interesting questions, to cause them to write themes calculated to spread impiety amongst the people, such as burlesques on the Psalms, pasquinades on the prophets, and caricatures of personages of the Old Testament after the manner of Voltaire and his school. It is surprising with what exactitude these Minervals follow out the instructions of Weishaupt to this day. At this moment, in London, under the eyes of the Lord Chancellor, pamphlets with hideous woodcuts, ridiculing David, the man after God's own heart, are weekly published. One of these, which was handed to me in a public place, had a woodcut representing the meek monarch of Judea, with a head just severed from a human body in one hand, and the sword that did the deed in the other. Another represented him amidst a set of ridiculous figures dancing. From this we can easily judge that illuminated Masonry is at work somewhere even in London, and that the Masonry in high quarters is blind to its excesses, exactly as happened in France a few years before the French Revolution. Now these Minervals, if they manifested what the German Masons call religionary inclinations, might indeed receive the first 3 Masonic degrees, but they were not to be further promoted in Illuminism. They were relegated to the rank and file of Masonry, who were of use in many ways for the movement, but they were never to be trusted with the real secret. The teacher, without seeming to do so, was ordered to encourage, but not to applaud publicly, such blasphemies as the Minervals might make use of in their essays. They were to be led on, seemingly by themselves, in the ways of irreligion, immorality, and atheism until ripe for further promotion in evil progress. Finally, in the advanced grades of illuminated major and minor, and in those of Scotch knight and epopt or priest, they were told the whole secret of the order as follows, in a discourse by the initiator. "Remember," he said, "that from the first invitations which we have given you, in order to attract you to us, we have commenced by telling you that in the projects of our order there did not enter any designs against religion. You remember that such an assurance was again given to you when you were admitted into the ranks of our novices, and that it was repeated when you entered into our Minerval Academy. Remember also how much from the first grades we have spoken to you of morality and virtue, but at the same time how much the studies which we prescribed for you and the instructions which we gave you rendered both morality and virtue independent of all religion, how much we have been at pains to make you understand, while making to you the eulogy of religion, that it was not anything else than those mysteries and that worship degenerated in the hands of the priest. You remember with what art, with what simulated respect, we have spoken to you of Christ and of His gospel. But in the grades of greater Illuminism, of Scotch Knight, and of Epopt or priest, how we have known to form from Christ's gospel that of our reason, and from its morality that of nature, and from its religion that of nature, and from religion, reason, morality, and nature, to make the religion and the morality of the rights of man, of equality, and of liberty. Remember that while insinuating to you the different parts of this system, we have caused them to bud forth from yourselves as if your own opinions. We have placed you on the way. You have replied to our questions very much more than we did to yours. When we demanded of you, for example, whether the religions of peoples responded to the end for which men adopted them, if the religion of Christ, pure and simple, was that which the different sects professed today, we knew well enough what to hold, but it was necessary to know to what point we had succeeded to cause our sentiments to germinate in you. We have had very many prejudices to overcome in you, before being able to persuade you that the pretended religion of Christ was nothing else than the work of priests, of imposture, and of tyranny. If it be so with that religion so much proclaimed and admired, what are we to think of other religions? Understand, then, that they have all the same fictions for their origin, that they are all equally founded on lying, error, chimera, and imposture. Behold our secret. The turns and counter-turns which it was necessary to make, the eulogies which it was necessary to give to the pretended secret schools, the fable of the Freemasons being in possession of the veritable doctrine, and our Illuminism today, the sole inheritor of these mysteries, will no longer astonish you at this moment. If, in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, remember that the end justifies the means, and that the wise ought to take all the means to do good, which the wicked take to do evil. Those which we have taken to deliver you, those which we take to deliver one day the human race from all religion, are nothing else than a pious fraud which we reserve to unveil some day in the grade of magus, or philosopher illuminated. Ségur, Le secret de la franc-maçonnerie, page 49. The above extract will serve to show you what manner of man Weishaupt was, and the quality of the teaching he invented. His organization, for the perfection of which he deeply studied the constitution of the then suppressed Society of Jesus, contemplated placing the thread of the whole conspiracy, destined to be controlled by the Illuminati, in the hands of one man, advised by a small council. The Illuminati were to be in Masonry and of Masonry, so as to move amongst its members secretly. They were so trained that they could obtain the mastery in every form of secret society, and thus render it subservient to their own chief. Their fidelity to him was made perfect by the most severe and complex system of espionage. The chief himself was kept safe by his position, his long training, and by his counsel. It thus happened that no matter to what office or position the Illuminati attained, they had to become subservient to the general aims of the order. Weishaupt, after being deprived of his professorship in Bavaria, found an asylum with the Prince of Coburg-Gotha, where he remained in honor, affluence, and security until his death in 1830. He continued all his life the chief of the Illuminati, and this fact may account in large measure for the fidelity with which the Illuminati of the Revolution, the Directory, the Consulate, the Empire, the Restoration, and the Revolution of 1830 invariably carried out his program of perpetual conspiracy for the ends he had in view. It may also account for the strange vitality of the spirit of the Illuminati in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Spain, and of its continuance through the illuminated reigns of Nubius and Palmerston, the successors of Weishaupt, to our own day. This we shall see further on, but meanwhile we shall glance at the first step of Weishaupt to rule over Masonry through his disciples. This was by calling together the famous General Council of Freemasonry known as the Convent of Wilhelmsbad. Chapter 7. The Convent of Wilhelmsbad. From its rise, Freemasonry appears as a kind of dark parody of the Church of Christ. The names taken by its dignitaries, the form of its hierarchy, the designations affected by its lodges and obediences, the language of its rituals, all seem to be a kind of aping after the usages of Christianity. When Saint Martin wished to spread his Illuminism in France, he managed to have a meeting of deputy Masons from all the lodges in that country. This was designated the Convent of the Gauls, and Lyon, the place of its meeting, was called the Holy City. Weishaupt had more extended views. He meant to reach all humanity by means of Masonry, and looked for a convent far more general than that of Lyon. When, therefore, he had matured his plans for impregnating the Masonry of the world with his infernal system, he began to cast about for means to call that convent. The Illuminism of Saint Martin was in full sympathy with him, but it could not effect his purpose. What he wanted was that a kind of general council of the Masonry, extended at the time throughout the earth, should be called together. And he hoped that, by adroitly manipulating the representatives whom he knew would be sent to it by the lodges of every nationality of Masons, his own Illuminism might be adopted as a kind of high, arch, or hidden Masonry throughout its entire extent. He succeeded in his design, and in 1781, under the official convocation of the Duke of Brunswick, acting as Supreme Grand Master, deputies from every country where Freemasonry existed were summoned to meet at Wilhelmsbad in council. They came from every portion of the British Empire, from the newly formed United States of America, from all the nations of continental Europe, every one of which at that period had lodges, from the territories of the Grand Turk, and from the Indian and colonial possessions of France, Spain, Portugal, and Holland. The principal and most numerous representatives were, however, from Germany and France. Through the skillful agency of the notorious Baron Knigg, and another still more astute adept of his, named Ditfort, Weishaupt completely controlled this council. He further caused measures to be there concerted which in a few years led to the French Revolution, and afterwards handed Germany over to the French revolutionary generals acting under the Girondins, the Jacobins, and the Directory. I would wish, if time permitted, to enter at length into the proofs of this fact. It will suffice, however, for my present purpose, to state that more than sufficient evidence of it was found by the Bavarian government, which had, some 5 years later, to suppress the Illuminati, and that one of the members of the convent, the Count de Virennes, was struck with such horror at the depravity of the body that he abandoned Illuminism and became a fervent Catholic. He said to a friend, "I will not tell you the secrets which I bring, but I can say that a conspiracy is laid so secret and so deep that it will be very difficult for monarchy and religion not to succumb to it." It may be also of use to remark that many of the leaders of the French Revolution, and notably most of those who lived through it and profited by it, were deputy Masons sent from various lodges in France to the convent of Wilhelmsbad. Chapter 8. Kabbalistic Masonry or Masonic Spiritism. Before proceeding further with the history of Freemasonry, I shall stay a moment to consider a very remarkable feature of its strange composition, without which it scarcely ever appears. The world was never without wizards, witches, necromancers, jugglers, and those who really had, or through imposture pretended to have, intercourse with demons. Masonry, in its various ramifications, is the great continuator of this feature of a past which we had thought departed forever. Spirit rapping, table turning, medium imposture, etc., distinguish its adepts in Protestant countries and in Catholic ones. We have almost incredible stories of the intercourse with the devil and his angels, which men like the Carbonari of Italy maintain. However, from the very beginning, Freemasonry has had a kind of peculiar dark mysticism connected with it. It loves to revel in such mysteries as the secret conclaves of the Jews used to practice in the countries in which they were persecuted, and which were common amongst those unclean heretics, the Bulgarians, the Gnostics, the Albigenses, and the Waldenses. The excesses alleged against the Templars were also accompanied by secret signs and symbols which Masonry adopted. But whatever may have been the extent of this mysticism in Masonry before, a spurious kind of spiritism became part of its very essence since the advent of the celebrated Cagliostro, who traveled all over Europe under the instructions of Weishaupt, and founded more lodges than did any individual Freemason then or since. The real name of this arch-impostor was Balsamo. He was an inveterate sorcerer, and in his peregrinations in the East, picked up from every source the secrets of alchemy, astrology, jugglery, legerdemain, and occult science of every kind about which he could get any information. Like the Masonry to which he became affiliated at an early period, he was an adept at acting and speaking a lie. He suited Weishaupt, who, though knowing him to be an impostor, nevertheless employed him for the diffusion of Illuminism. Accompanied by his no less celebrated wife, Lorenza, he appeared in Venice as the Marquis Pellegrini, and subsequently traversed Italy, Germany, Spain, England, the Netherlands, and Russia. In the latter country he amassed, at the court of Catherine II, an immense fortune. In France, assisted by the efforts of the Illuminati, he was received as a kind of demigod, and called the Divine Cagliostro. He established new lodges in all parts of the country. At Bordeaux he remained 11 months for this purpose. In Paris he established lodges for women of a peculiarly cabalistic and impure kind, with inner departments horribly mysterious. At the reception of members he used rites and ceremonies exactly resembling the absurd practices of spirit mediums, who see and speak to spirits, etc., and introduced all that nonsense with which we are made now familiar by his modern followers. He claimed the power of conferring immortal youth, health, and beauty, and what he called moral and physical regeneration, by the aid of drugs and illuminated masonry. He was the father and the founder of the existing rite of Mizraim, the Egyptian rite in masonry. The scoundrel became involved in the celebrated case of the diamond necklace, and was sent to the Bastille, from which he managed to pass to England, where in 1787 he undertook to foretell the destruction of the Bastille and of the monarchy of France, the Revolution, and, but here he miscalculated, the advent of a prince who would abolish lettres de cachet, convoke the States General, and establish the worship of reason. All these measures were resolved on at Wilhelmsbad, and Cagliostro of course knew that well. His only miscalculation was regarding the Prince Grand Master. The revolution went on a little too far for the wretched Égalité, who ended his treason to his house by losing his head at the guillotine. As to Cagliostro, he made his way to Rome, where the Inquisition put an end to his exploits on detecting his attempts at Illuminism. His secret powers could not deliver him from prison. He died there miserably in 1795, after attempting to strangle a poor Capuchin whom he asked for as confessor, and in whose habit he had hoped to escape. This impostor is of course made a martyr to the Inquisition accordingly. Masonry does much to disown Cagliostro, but with a strange inconsistency it keeps the Egyptian rite founded by him, and clings to mysticism of the debased kind he introduced. It is wonderful how extremes thus meet, how men who make it a sign of intellectual strength to deny the existence of the God that made them, bow down stupidly and superstitiously before devils, real or imaginary. Necromancy is a characteristic of Antichrist, of whom we read that he will show great signs and wonders so as to deceive, if that were possible, even the elect. He will be, when he comes, both a Cromwell and a Cagliostro. Dillon. Chapter 9. The French Revolution. I may here remark that the conspiracy of the Illuminati and of Freemasonry generally was far from being a secret to many of the courts of Europe. But then, just as at the present moment, it had friends, female as well as male, in every court. These balked the wholesome attempts of some rulers to stay its deadly intrigues against princes, governments, and all order, as well as against its one grand enemy, the Church of Jesus Christ. The court of Bavaria found out, as I have said, but only by an accident, a part of the plans of the Illuminati, and gave the alarm. But, strange to say, that alarm was unheeded by the other courts of Europe, Catholic as well as Protestant. A revolution was expected, but as now each court hoped to stave off the worst consequences from itself, and to profit by the ruin of its neighbors. The voice of the Holy Father was raised against Freemasonry again and again. Clement VIII, Benedict XIV, and other pontiffs condemned it. The agents and ministers of the Holy See gave private advices and made urgent appeals to have the evil stopped while yet the powers of Europe could do so. These were all baffled, and the court of the Grand Monarch and every court of continental Europe slept in the torpor of a living death, until wakened to a true sense of danger at a period far too late to remedy the disasters which irreligion, vice, stupidity, and recklessness hastened. The lodges of the Illuminati in France, meanwhile, carried on the conspiracy. They had amassed and expended immense sums in deluging the country with immoral and atheistic literature. Mirabeau, in his Monarchie Prussienne, Volume 6, page 67, published before the Revolution, thus speaks of these sums. Masonry in general, and especially the branch of the Templars, produced annually immense sums by means of the cost of receptions and contributions of every kind. A part of the total was employed in the expenses of the order, but another part, much more considerable, went into a general fund of which no one, except the first amongst the brethren, knew the destination. Cagliostro, when questioned before the Holy Roman Inquisition, confessed that he led his sumptuous existence thanks to the funds furnished him by the Illuminati. He also stated that he had commission from Weishaupt to prepare the French lodges to receive his direction. See Deschamps, Volume 5, page 129. Discontent was thus sown broadcast amongst every class of the population. Masonic lodges multiplied, inspired by the instructed emissaries of the remorseless Weishaupt, and the direct work of Freemasonry in subsequent events is manifest not only in the detailed prophecy of Cagliostro, founded on what he knew was decided upon, but is still more clearly evidenced by a second convent held by the French Illuminati, where everything was arranged for the Revolution. The men prominent in this conclave were the men subsequently most active in every scene that followed. Mirabeau, Lafayette, Fouché, Talleyrand, Danton, Murat, Robespierre, Cambaceres, and in fact every foremost name in the subsequent convulsions of the country, were not only Illuminati, but foremost amongst the Illuminati. Footnote. It is commonly believed that the encyclopedists and philosophers were the only men who overturned by their writings altar and throne at the time of the Revolution. But, apart from the facts that these writers were, to a man, Freemasons, and the most daring and plotting of Freemasons, we have abundant authority to prove that other Freemasons were everywhere even more practically engaged in the same work. Louis Blanc, who will be accepted as an authority on this point, thus writes: "It is of consequence to introduce the reader into the mine which at that time was being dug beneath thrones and altars by revolutionists, very much more profound and active than the encyclopedists, an association composed of men of all countries, of all religions, of all ranks, bound together by symbolic bonds, engaged under an inviolable oath to preserve the secret of their interior existence. They were forced to undergo terrific proofs while occupying themselves with fantastic ceremonies, but otherwise practiced beneficence and looked upon themselves as equals, though divided in three classes: apprentices, companions, and masters. Freemasonry consists in that." Now, on the eve of the French Revolution, Freemasonry was found to have received an immense development. Spread throughout the entire of Europe, it seconded the meditative genius of Germany, agitated France silently, and presented everywhere the image of a society founded on principles contrary to those of civil society. Monsignor Ségur writes on this: "See to what a point the reign of Jesus Christ was menaced at the hour the Revolution broke out. It was not France alone that it agitated, but the entire of Europe. What do I say? The world was in the power of Masonry. All the lodges of the world came in 1781 to Wilhelmsbad by delegates from Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. From the most distant coasts discovered by navigators they came, zealous apostles of Masonry. They all returned penetrated with the Illuminism of Weishaupt, that is, atheism, and animated with the poison of incredulity with which the orators of the convent had inspired them. Europe and the Masonic world were then in arms against Catholicity. Therefore, when the signal was given, the shock was terrible, terrible especially in France, in Italy, in Spain, in the Catholic nations which they wished to separate from the Pope and cast into schism until the time came when they could completely de-Christianize them. This accounts well for the captivities of Pius VI and Pius VII. The cardinals were dispersed, the bishops torn from their sees, the pastors separated from their flocks, the religious orders destroyed, the goods of the church confiscated, the churches overturned, the convents turned into barracks, the sacred vessels stolen and melted down by sacrilegious avidity, the bells turned into money and cannons, scaffolds erected everywhere, and victims in thousands, in hecatombs, especially from amongst the clergy. In one word, all the horrors summed up in the Revolution, and the end, which was the great unerring power of all its actions, namely, to see Christ cast down from his altars, to make way for the goddess called Reason. End of footnote. Some disappeared under their own guillotine, others outlived the doom of their fellows. Constantly, the men of the whole conspiracy had understandings and relations with each other. Weishaupt, at the safe distance of Coburg Gotha, gave them his willing aid and that of the German Freemasons. This concert enabled them to float on every billow which the troubled sea of the Revolution caused to swell. And if they did not succeed in making France and all Europe a social ruin, such as that contemplated at Wilhelmsbad, it was from want of power, not from want of will. Position and wealth made many of them desire to conserve what the Revolution threw into their hands, but they remained under all changes of fortune Freemasons, as they and their successors are to this day. Perhaps under the influence of oaths, of secret terror, and of the sect, they dare not remain long otherwise. One or two individuals may drop aside, but some fatality or necessity keeps the leaders Illuminati always. They, as a whole body, remain ever the same, and recoil before political adversity, only to gather more strength for a future attack upon religion and order, still wider and more fatal than the one which preceded it. They are not at any time one whit less determined to plunge the world into the anarchy and bloodshed they created at the French Revolution than they were in 1789. On this point, let one of themselves speak. "I have had," says a Scotch Freemason, horrified at the results achieved by the fraternity in their work up to 1797, "I have had the means to follow all the attempts made during 50 years, under the specious pretext of enlightening the world with the torch of philosophy, and to dissipate all the clouds by which superstition, religious and civil, used to retain the people of Europe in the darkness of slavery. I have observed the progress of these doctrines mixing themselves and allying themselves more and more closely with the different systems of Masonry. Finally, I have seen them forming an association having for its sole object the destruction, even to the very foundations, of all the religious establishments, and the overthrow of all the existing governments of Europe. I have seen that association extend its systems with a zeal so sustained that it became almost irresistible, and I have remarked that the personages who have had the greatest part in the French Revolution were members of that association, that their plans had been conceived upon its principles and executed with its assistance. I am convinced that it exists always, that it works always silently, and all appearances prove that not only its emissaries strongly endeavor to propagate amongst us its abominable doctrines, but that there are even in England lodges which since 1784 correspond with the Mother Lodge. It is in order to unmask these, to prove that the ringleaders are knaves who preached a morality and a doctrine of which they knew the falsehood and the danger, and that their real intention was to abolish all forms of religion, to overthrow all governments, and to make of the entire world one scene of pillage and murder, that I offer an extract of the informations I have taken on this matter. I have quoted these words of Robison to show that as early as 1797 the connection between Freemasonry and the French Revolution was well understood. Since then, Louis Blanc and other Masonic writers have gloried in the fact. "Our end," said the celebrated Alta Vendita, to which I shall have to refer presently, "is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution." In fact, what Freemasonry did in France, it now labors with greater caution to effect on some future day throughout the entire world. It then submitted with perfect docility to a great military leader, who arose out of its own work and principles. Such another leader will finally direct its last efforts against God and man. That leader will be Antichrist.
Chapter 10, Napoleon and Freemasonry. I shall have to ask your careful attention for a few moments to the leader who arose out of the first French Revolution, and whose military and diplomatic fame is still fresh in the recollection of many of the present generation. That leader was Napoleon Bonaparte. In the days of his greatest prosperity, nothing was so distasteful to him as to be reminded of his Jacobin past. He then wished to pose as another Charlemagne or Rudolph of Habsburg. He wished to be considered the friend of religion, and of the Catholic religion in particular. He did a something for the restoration of the Church in France, but it was as little as he could help. It perhaps prevented a more wholesome and complete reaction in favor of the true religious aspirations of the population. It was done grudgingly, parsimoniously, and meanly. And when it had been done, Napoleon did all he could do to undo its benefits. He soon became the persecutor, the heartless, cruel, ungrateful persecutor of the pontiff, and an opponent to the best interests of religion in France and in every country which had the misfortune to fall under his sway. The reason of all this was that Napoleon had commenced his career as a Freemason, and a Freemason he remained in spirit and in effect to the end of his life. It is known that he owed his first elevation to the Jacobins, and that his earliest patron was Robespierre. His first campaign in Italy was characterized by the utmost brutality which could gratify Masonic hatred for the Church. He suppressed the abodes of the consecrated servants of God, sacked churches, cathedrals, and sanctuaries, and reduced the Pope to the direst extremities. His language was the reflex of his acts and of his heart. His letters breathe everywhere the spirit of advanced Freemasonry, gloating over the wounds it had been able to inflict upon the spouse of Christ. Yet this adventurer has, with great adroitness, been able to pass with many, and especially in Ireland, as a good Catholic. Because he was the enemy of England, or rather that England led by the counsels of Pitt and Burke constituted herself the implacable enemy of the Revolution of which he was the incarnation and continuation, many opposed to England for political reasons regard Bonaparte as a kind of hero. No one can doubt the military genius of the man, nor indeed his great general ability, but he was in all his acts what Freemasonry made him. He was mean, selfish, tyrannical, cruel. He was reckless of blood. He could tolerate or use the Church while that suited his policy. But he had from the beginning to the very end of his career that thorough indifference to her welfare and want of belief in her doctrines which an early and lifelong connection with the Illuminati inspired. Father Deschamps writes of him, Napoleon Bonaparte was in effect an advanced Freemason, and his reign has been the most flourishing epoch of Freemasonry. During the Reign of Terror, the Grand Orient ceased its activity. The moment Napoleon seized upon power, the lodges were opened in every place. I have said that the revolutionary rulers in France were all Illuminati, that is, Freemasons of the most pronounced type, whose ultimate aim was the destruction of every existing religion and form of secular government, in order to found an atheistic social republic which should extend throughout the world and embrace all mankind. Freemasonry welcomes, as we have seen, the Mohammedan, the Indian, the Chinese, and the Buddhist, as well as the Christian and the Jew. It designs to conquer all, as a means of bringing all into the one level of atheism and communism. When, therefore, its directory, in their desire to get rid of Napoleon, planned the expedition to Egypt and Asia, they meant the realization of a part of this program, as well as the removal of a troublesome rival. A universal monarchy is, in their idea, the most efficacious means for arriving at a universal republic. Once obtained, the dagger with which they removed Gustavus III of Sweden, or the guillotine by which they rid France of Louis XVI, can at any moment remove Caesar and call in Brutus. They are not the men to recoil before deeds of blood for the accomplishment of their purposes. Now Napoleon, who was, as Father Deschamps informs us, a member of the Lodge of the Templars, the extreme illuminated Lodge of Lyon, and had given proof of his fidelity to Masonry in Italy, was the very man to extend the rule of republicanism throughout Asia. He appeared in Egypt with the same professions of hypocritical respect for the Quran, the Prophet, and Mohammedanism, as he afterwards made when it suited his policy for Catholicism. His address to the people of Egypt will prove this. It ran as follows, with true Masonic hypocrisy. Cadis, sheikhs, imams, tell the people that we are the friends of true Mussulman, that we respect more than the Mamelukes do God, his Prophet, and the Al-Quran. Is it not we who have destroyed the Pope who wished that war should be made against the Mussulman? Is it not we who have destroyed the Knights of Malta, because these madmen thought that God willed them to make war upon the Mussulman? Is it not we who have been in all ages the friends of the Grand Seigneur, may God fulfill his desires, and the enemy of his enemies? God is God, and Mahomet is his prophet. Fear nothing above all for the religion of the Prophet which I love. The cool hypocrisy of this address is manifested by a proclamation he made on that occasion to his own soldiers. The same proclamation also shows the value we may place on his protestations of attachment to and respect for the usages of Christianity. The following is a translation of it. Soldiers, the peoples with whom we are about to live are Mohammedan. The first article of their faith is this: there is no God but God, and Mahomet is his prophet. Do not contradict them. Act with them as you have acted with the Jews and with the Italians. Have the same respect for their muftis and their imams as you have had for rabbis and bishops. Have for the ceremonies prescribed by the Al-Quran for the mosques the same tolerance you had for convents, for synagogues, and for the religion of Moses and of Jesus Christ. We read in the correspondence of Napoleon I, published by order of Napoleon III, what he thought of this proclamation to the very end of his career. After all, it was not impossible that circumstances might have brought me to embrace Islam, he said at St. Helena. Could it be thought that the empire of the East, and perhaps the subjection of the whole of Asia, was not worth a turban and pantaloons, for it was reduced to so much solely? We would lose only our breeches and our hats. I say that the army, disposed as it was, would have lent itself to that project undoubtedly, and it saw in it nothing but a subject for laughter and pleasantry. Meanwhile, you see the consequences. I took Europe by a backstroke. The old civilization was beaten down, and who then thought to disturb the destinies of our France and the regeneration of the world? Who had dared to undertake it? Who could have accomplished it? Neither prosperity nor adversity changed Napoleon. He was a skeptic to the end. He said at St. Helena to Las Casas, "Everything proclaims the existence of a God. That is not to be doubted, but all our religions are evidently the children of men. Why do these religions cry down one another, combat one another? Why has that been in all ages and all places? It is because men are always men. It is because the priests have always insinuated, slipped in lies and fraud everywhere. Nevertheless," he continued, "from the moment that I had the power, I had been eager to re-establish religion. I used it as the base and the root. It was in my eyes the support of good morality, of true principles, of good manners. I am assuredly far from being an atheist, but I cannot believe all that they teach me in spite of my reason, under penalty of being deceitful and hypocritical. To say whence I come, what I am, where I go, is above my ideas. And nevertheless all that is, I am the watch which exists and does not know itself. No doubt," he continued, "but my spirit of mere doubt was, in my quality of emperor, a benefit for the people. Otherwise, how could I equally favor sects so contrary if I had been dominated over by one alone? How could I preserve the independence of my thoughts and of my movements under the suggestions of a confessor who could govern me by means of the fear of hell? What an empire could not a wicked man, the most stupid of men, under that title of confessor exercise over those who govern nations? I was so penetrated with these truths that I preserved myself well to act in such a manner, that in as far as it lay in me, I would educate my son in the same religious lines in which I found myself." 2 months later, the ex-emperor said that from the age of 13 he had lost all religious faith. Thiers says that when Napoleon intended to proclaim himself emperor, he wished to give the Masons a pledge of his principles, and that he did this by killing the Duc d'Enghien. He said, "They wish to destroy the revolution in attacking it in my person. I will defend it, for I am the revolution. I, myself. They will so consider it from this day forward, for they will know of what we are capable." A less brave but still more accomplished relative of his, Napoleon III, in his Idées Napoléoniennes, says, "The revolution dying, but not vanquished, left to Napoleon the accomplishments of its last designs. Enlighten the nations, it would have said to him. Place upon solid bases the principal result of our efforts. Execute and extent that which I have done in depth. Be for Europe what I have been for France. That grand mission Napoleon accomplished, even to the end." When Napoleon obtained power, it was, we know, principally by means of the illuminated Freemason Talleyrand. By him and his confederates of the Illuminati he was recalled from Egypt and placed in the way of its attainment. His brothers were, every one of them, deep in the secrets of the sect. Its supreme hidden directory saw that a reaction had set in, which, if not averted, would speedily lead to the return of the exiled Bourbons, and to the disgorgement of ill-gotten goods on the part of the revolutionists. As a lesser evil, therefore, and as a means of forwarding the unification of Europe which they had planned, by his conquests, they placed supreme power in the hands of Bonaparte, and urged him on in his career, watching at the same time closely their own opportunities for the development of the deadly designs of the sect. Then they obtained the first places in his empire for themselves. They put as much mischief into the measures of relief given to conscience as they could. They established a fatal supremacy for secularism in the matter of education. They brought dissension between the Pope and the Emperor. They caused the second confiscation of the states of the Church. They caused and continued to the end the imprisonment of Pius VII. They were at the bottom of every attack made by Napoleon while Emperor upon the rights of the Church, the freedom and independence of the Supreme Pontiff, and the well-being of religion. But the chief mistake of Napoleon was the encouragement he gave to Freemasonry. It served his purpose admirably for a while, that is, so long as he served the present and ultimate views of the conspiracy. For a conspiracy, Masonry ever was and ever will be. Even if Cambacérès, Talleyrand, Fouché, and the old leaders of the Illuminati, whom he had taken into his confidence and richly rewarded, should be satisfied, there was a mass of others whom no reward could conciliate, and who, filled with the spirit of the sect, were sure to be ever on the lookout for the means to advance the designs of the Weishaupt and his inner circle. That inner circle never ceased its action. It held the members of the sect, whom it not only permitted but assisted to attain high worldly honors, completely in its power, and hence in absolute subjection. For them, as well as for the humblest member of the secret conclave, the poisoned aqua tofana and the dagger were ready to do the work of certain death, should they lack obedience to those depraved fanatics of one diabolical idea, who were found worthy to be selected by their fellow conspirators to occupy the highest place of infamy and secret power. These latter scattered secretly amidst the rank and file of the lodges, hundreds of Argus-eyed, skilled plotters, who kept the real power of inner or high Masonry in the hands of its hidden masters. Masonry from this secret vantage ground ceaselessly conspired during the Empire. It assisted the conquests of the victor of Austerlitz and Jena, and if Deschamps, who quotes from the most reliable sources, is to be trusted, it actually did more for these victories than the great military leader himself. Through its instrumentality, the resources of the enemies of Napoleon were never at hand. The designs of the Austrian and other generals opposed to him were thwarted, treason was rife in their camps, and information fatal to their designs was conveyed to the French commander. Masonry was then on his side, and as now the secret resources of the order, its power of hidden influence and espionage, were placed at the disposal of the cause it served. But when Masonry had reason to fear that Napoleon's power might be perpetuated, when his alliance with the imperial family of Austria, and above all, when the consequence of that alliance, an heir to his throne, caused danger to the universal republic it could otherwise assure itself of at his death, when, too, he began to show a coldness for the sect, and sought means to prevent it from the propagandism of its diabolical aims, then it became his enemy, and his end was not far off. Distracting counsels prevailed in his cabinet. His opponents began to get that information regarding his movements which he had obtained previously of theirs. Members of the sect urged on his mad expedition to Moscow. His resources were paralyzed, and he was, in one word, sold by secret invisible foes into the hands of his enemies. In Germany, Weishaupt and his party, still living on in dark intrigue, prepared secretly for his downfall. His generals were beaten in detail. He was betrayed, hoodwinked, and finally led to his deposition and ruin. He then received with a measure, pressed down and overflowing, and shaken together, the gratitude of the father of lies, incarnate in Freemasonry, in the Illuminati, and kindred atheistic secret societies. Banished to Elba, he was permitted to return to France only in order to meet the fate of an outcast and a prisoner upon the rock of St. Helena, where he died abandoned and persecuted by the dark sect which had used, abused, and betrayed him. So it has continued, as we shall see, to use, to abuse, and to betray every usurper or despot whom it lures into its toils. We shall now glance at its action, the action of Freemasonry after the fall of Napoleon.
Chapter 11. Freemasonry after the fall of Napoleon. It would be very interesting, if we had time, to enter into the many intrigues of that very same body of Illuminati who had planned and executed the revolution, and had then created successively the Directory, the Consulate, and the Empire in France, as they now posed in a new capacity as friends to the return of monarchy in Europe generally. This they did for the purposes of the Freemasons, and in order to keep the power they wielded so long in their own hands, and in the hands of their party. Now I wish you to note that Weishaupt, the father of the Illuminati, and the fanatical and deep director of all its operations, was even then living in power and security at Coburg Gotha, and that his wily confederates were ministers in every court of Europe. Then, as now, the invincible determination with which they secreted their quality from the eyes of monarchs as well as of the general public enabled them to pose in any character or capacity without fear of being detected as Freemasons, or at least as Illuminati. Since the reign of Frederick the Great, they filled the court of Berlin. Many minor German princes continued to be Freemasons. The Duke of Brunswick was the central figure in the first Masonic conspiracy, and though, with the hypocrisy common to the sect, he issued a declaration highly condemnatory of his fellows, it is generally believed that he remained to the end attached to the regeneration of humanity in the interests of atheism. The court of Vienna was more or less Masonic since the reign of the wretched Joseph II. Alexander of Russia was educated by La Harpe, a Freemason, and at the very period when called upon to play a principal part in the celebrated Holy Alliance, he was under the hidden guidance of others of the Illuminati. Fessler, an apostate Austrian religious, the counselor of Joseph II, after having abjured Christianity, remained, while professing a respect for religion, its most determined enemy. He founded what is known as the Tugendbund, a society by which German Freemasonry put on a certain Christian covering in order more securely to outlive the reaction against atheism, and to de-Christianize the world again at a better opportunity. The Tugendbund refused to receive Jews, and devised many other means to deceive Christians to become substantially Freemasons without incurring church censures or going against ideas then adverse to the old Freemasonry, which nevertheless continued to exist as satanic as ever under Christian devices. In France, the Illuminati of the schools of Wilhelmsbad and Lyon continued their machinations without much change of front, though they covered themselves with that impenetrable secrecy which the sect has found so convenient for disarming public suspicion while pursuing its aims. Possessing means of deceiving the outside world, and capable of using every kind of hypocrisy and ruse, the Freemasons of both France and Germany plotted at this period with more secure secrecy and success than ever. There is nothing which Freemasonry dreads more than light. It is the one thing it cannot stand. Therefore it has always taken care to provide itself with adepts and allies able to disarm public suspicion in its regard. Should outsiders endeavor to find out its real character and aims, it takes refuge at once under the semblance of puerility, of harmless amusement, of beneficence, or even of half-witted simplicity. It is content to be laughed at in order not to be found out. But it is, for all its puerility, the same dangerous foe to Christianity, law, legitimacy, and order which it proved itself to be before and during the first French Revolution, and which it will continue to be until the world has universal reason to know the depth, the malignity, and the extent of its remorseless designs. Footnote: At the Council of Verona, held by the European sovereigns in 1822, to guard their thrones and peoples from the revolutionary excesses which threatened Spain, Naples, and Piedmont, the Count Haugwitz, minister of the King of Prussia, who then accompanied his master, made the following speech. Arrived at the end of my career, I believe it to be my duty to cast a glance upon the secret societies whose power menaces humanity today more than ever. Their history is so bound up with that of my life that I cannot refrain from publishing it once more and from giving some details regarding it. My natural disposition and my education having excited in me so great a desire for information that I could not content myself with ordinary knowledge, I wished to penetrate into the very essence of things. But shadow follows light. Thus an insatiable curiosity develops itself in proportion to the efforts which one makes to penetrate further into the sanctuary of science. These two sentiments impelled me to enter into the Society of Freemasons. It is well known that the first step which one makes in the order is little calculated to satisfy the mind. That is precisely the danger to be dreaded for the inflammable imagination of youth. Scarcely had I attained my majority, when not only did I find myself at the head of Masonry, but what is more, I occupied a distinguished place in the chapter of high grades. Before I had the power of knowing myself, before I could comprehend the situation in which I had rashly engaged myself, I found myself charged with the superior direction of the Masonic reunions of a part of Prussia, of Poland, and of Russia. Masonry was, at that time, divided into two parts in its secret labors. The first place in its emblems the explanation of the philosopher's stone. Deism and non-atheism was the religion of these sectaries. The central seat of their labors was at Berlin, under the direction of the Dr. Zumdorf. it was not the same with the other part of which the Duke of Brunswick was the apparent chief. In open conflict between themselves, the two parties gave each other the hand in order to obtain the dominion of the world. To conquer thrones, to serve themselves with kings as an order, such was their aim. It would be superfluous to explain to you in what manner, in my ardent curiosity, I came to know the secrets of the one party and of the other. The truth is, the secret of the two sects is no longer a mystery for me. That secret is revolting. It was in the year 1777 that I became charged with the direction of one part of the Prussian lodges, 3 or 4 years before the convent of Wilhelmsbad and the invasion of the lodges by Illuminism. My action extended even over the brothers dispersed throughout Poland and Russia. If I did not myself see it, I could not give myself even a plausible explanation of the carelessness with which governments have been able to shut their eyes to such a disorder, a veritable state within a state. Not only were the chiefs in constant correspondence and employed particular ciphers, but even they reciprocally sent emissaries one to another. To exercise a dominating influence over thrones, such was our aim, as it had been of the Knight Templars. I thus acquired the firm conviction that the drama commenced in 1788 and 1789, the French Revolution, the regicide with all its horrors, not only was then resolved upon, but was even the result of these associations and oaths, etc. Of all my contemporaries of that epoch, there is not one left. My first care was to communicate to William III all my discoveries. We came to the conclusion that all the Masonic associations, from the most humble even to the very highest degrees, could not do otherwise than employ religious sentiments in order to execute plans the most criminal, and make use of the first in order to cover the second. This conviction, which His Highness Prince William held in common with me, caused me to take the firm resolution of renouncing Masonry. End of footnote. At the period of the reaction against Bonaparte, it seems to have taken long and wise counsel. When Talleyrand found that Weishaupt and the inner Masonry no longer approved of Napoleon's autocracy, he managed very adroitly that the Emperor should grow cold with him. He was thus free to take adverse measures against his master and to prepare himself for the coming change. The whole following of Bonaparte, recruited from the Illuminati, were ready to betray him. They could compass the fall of the tyrant, but the difficulty for them was to find one suitable to put in his place. It was decreed in their highest council that whosoever should come upon the throne of France should be as far removed as possible from being a friend to Catholicity or to any principle sustaining true religion. They therefore determined that, if at all possible, no member of the ancient house should reign, and as soon as the allied sovereigns, who were for the most part non-Catholic, had crushed Napoleon, these French Masons demanded the Protestant and Masonic King of Holland for king in France. This failing, they contrived by Masonic arts to obtain the first places in the provisional government which succeeded Napoleon. They endeavored to make the most of the inevitable, and to rule the incoming Louis XVIII in the interests of their sect and to the detriment of the Church and of Christianity. Notwithstanding the fact that they had shown open hostility to himself and to his house, Louis XVIII, strange to say, favored the Illuminati. Talleyrand was made minister, and the other advanced Freemasons of the empire, Seilly, Cambaceres, Fouché, and the rest, obtained place and power. These men at once applied themselves to subvert the sentiment of reaction in favor of the monarchy and of religion. Soon Louis XVIII gave the world the sad spectacle of a man prepared at their bidding to cut his own throat. He dissolved a parliament of ultra-loyalists because they were too loyal to him. The Freemasons took care that his next parliament should be full of its own creatures. They also wrung from the king under the plea of freedom of the press, permission to deluge the country anew with the infidel and immoral publications of Voltaire and his confederates, and with newspapers and periodicals which proved disastrous to his house, to royalty, and to Christianity in France. These led before long to the attempt upon the life of the Duke of Berry, to the revolution against Charles X, to the elevation of the son of the Grand Master, Égalité, as constitutional king, and to all the revolutionary results that have since distracted and disgraced unfortunate France. But much as Freemasonry effected in that country, it was not there but in peaceful Italy that its illuminated machinations produced the worst and most widespread fruits of death. We shall see this by a brief review of the Freemasonry which formed the kindred secret societies in Europe. Chapter 12. Kindred secret societies in Europe. We have seen that the use made of Freemasonry by the atheists of the last century was a very elastic one. As it came from England, it had all the qualities required by the remorseless revolutionists, who so eagerly and so ably employed it for their purposes. Its hypocritical professions of theism, of acceptation of the Bible and of beneficence, its terrible oaths of secrecy, its grotesque and absurd ceremonial, to which any meaning from the most silly to the deepest and darkest could be given, its ascending degrees, each one demanding additional secrets to be kept not only from outsiders, but from the lower degrees, the death penalty for indiscretion or disobedience, the system of mystery capable of any extension, the hidden hierarchy, in a word, all its qualities could be improved and elaborated at will by the infidels of the continent who had made British Masonry their own. Soon the strict subjection of all subordinate lodges to whatever Grand Orient or Mother Lodge they spring from, and on which they depend, and above all the complete understanding between the directors of the Masonic powers, that is, of the different rites into which the Masonry is divided, placed its entire government in a select ruling body, directed in turn by a small committee of the ablest conspirators, elected by and known to that body alone. The whole rank and file of Masonry receive their orders at present from this inner body, who are unknown to the mere Masons of the lodges. The members of the committee deputed by the lodges are able to testify to the fact of the authenticity of the orders. Those who rule from the hidden recesses take care that these deputies shall be men worthy of confidence. A lodge, therefore, has its master, its officers, and management, but its orders come through a channel that appears to be nothing, whereas it is everything in the movement of the whole mass. Thus it happens that the master of a lodge or the Grand Master of a province or of a nation, whose high-sounding titles may make him seem to outsiders to be everything, is in reality often nothing at all in the actual government of Masonry. The real power rests with the hidden committee of direction and confidential agents who move almost invisibly amongst the officers and members of the lodges. These hidden agents of iniquity are vigilant spies, secret wire-pullers, who are seldom promoted to any office, but content themselves with the real power which they are selected to use with dexterity and care. It was through this system that Weishaupt obtained the adoption of illuminated Masonry at the convent of Wilhelmsbad. Through the machinations of Koenig, he obtained from the delegates there assembled the approval of his plan that the ultimate end of Freemasonry and all secret plotting should be, first, pantheism, a form of atheism which flatters Masonic pride; second, communism of goods, women, and general concerns; third, that the means to arrive at these ends should be the destruction of the Church and of all forms of Christianity, the obliteration of every kind of supernatural belief, and finally, the removal of all existing human governments to make way for a universal republic, in which the utopian ideas of complete liberty from existing social, moral, and religious restraint, absolute equality, and social fraternity should reign. When these ends should be attained, but not till then, the secret work of the atheistic Freemasons should cease. At the convent of Wilhelmsbad, Weishaupt had the means taken to carry out this determination. There Masonry became one organized atheistic mass, while being still permitted to assume many fantastic shapes. The Knights Rosicrucian, the Templars, the Knights of Beneficence, the Brothers of Amity, were strictly united to illuminated Masonry. All could be reached through Masonry itself. All were placed under the same government. Masonry was made more elastic than ever. When, as in the cases of Ireland and Poland, an enslaved nationality should be found, which the Supreme Invisible Directory wished to revolutionize, and when at the same time the existing respect for the words of the Vicar of Christ made Masonry hateful, a secret political society was ordered to be formed on the plan of Freemasonry, but with some other name. It was to put on, after the example of Masonry itself, the semblance of zeal and respect for religion. But it was bound to have horrible oaths, ascending degrees, censors, the terrible death penalty for indiscretion or treason, to be in essence, and in every sense, if not in name, a society identical with Freemasonry. The supreme direction of the Revolution was to contrive by sure means to have adepts high and powerful in its management. And the society was, even if founded to defend the Catholic religion, thus sure, sooner or later, to diverge from the Church and to become hostile to religion and to its ministers. The atheistic revolutionists of the continent in the last century learned to perfection the art to effect this, and hence the ready assistance which men who were murdering priests in Paris and throughout France and Italy gave to the Catholics of Ireland in '98. Was it to relieve the Catholics of Ireland from persecution, while they themselves were to a far more frightful extent oppressing the Catholic Church, the Catholic priesthood, Catholic religious, and Catholic people, for no other reason than the profession of the Catholic faith in France and Italy? By no means. They, at the very time, had already corrupted Irishmen. Some of these were open infidels, and others were Jacobite Freemasons of no particular attachment to any form of Christianity. They shared in Napoleon's indifference to religion, and were as ready to profess zeal for their Catholic fellow countrymen as he and his soldiers were ready to profess love for the Alcoran and the Prophet in Egypt, or for St. Januarius in Naples. But they and their leaders in Black Masonry knew that once they could unite even the very best and truest Catholic men in Ireland into a secret society on such lines as I have described, they would soon find an entrance for atheism into the country. They would not be wanting in means to win recruits by degrees from the best-intentioned Catholics so bound by oaths and so subjected to hidden influences. They were adepts at proselytism, especially amongst those who gave up liberty and will to unknown masters. If Irishmen, few indeed, thank God, but still Irishmen and Catholics, had lost their faith in France at the period of the Revolution, what could save the Irish Catholics in Ireland from the efforts and example of French and Irish atheistic liberators? Catholics suffered terribly under the Protestant domination, but they nobly kept their faith through the whole of that dreadful period. Their condition was bad during the penal days, but if the French obtained the mastery, even for a decade, at the Revolution, it would be worse, I believe, for the faith and liberty of Irish Catholics than the previous 2 centuries of heretical persecution. Providence, moved by the prayers of God's Mother, of St. Patrick, and of the innumerable host of Irish saints and martyrs, no doubt saved the country, and the agency of the atheists of France was carried to work the mischief it intended for Ireland upon other Catholic lands. It forced its tyranny very soon upon Italy, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, and the Rhenish provinces of Germany. That was bad enough, but it was not all. When the French revolutionary armies had departed from these countries, after the fall of Bonaparte, they left a deadly scourge that could not be removed behind them. That was the system of atheistic organization of which we have been speaking, and which was not slow in producing its malignant fruits. In Catholic Italy, where the scourge of the Revolution fell most heavily, the misfortune happened thus. The discontent consequent upon the multitude of political parties in that country gave the secret machinators of the Weishaupt school a splendid opportunity of again renewing their intrigues, while the miserable government of the Bourbons in France, in permitting Freemasonry to flourish, afforded its supreme direction an opportunity to assist them in many ways. Public opinion in Germany was unripe for any atheism unless veiled under the hypocritical pretenses of the Tugendbund. In Italy, however, though religion was strong amongst all classes, the division of the country into small principalities caused the hopes of the revolutionists to be more sanguine than anywhere else, and the opportunity of dealing a blow at the temporal power of the Pope, under the national pretext of a united Italy, was too great a temptation for the Supreme Masonic Directory to resist. Besides, it could not be forgotten by them that in making past efforts, the power of the Pope was the principal cause of their many failures. They rightly judged that the complete destruction of his temporal authority was essential to atheism, and the first and most necessary step to their ultimate views upon all Christianity, and for the subjugation of the world to their sway. The temporal power was the stronghold, the rallying point of every legitimate authority in Europe. With a sure instinct of self-preservation, the schismatical lord of Russia, the evangelical king of Prussia, the Protestant governments of England, Denmark, and Sweden, as well as the ancient legitimate Catholic dynasties of Portugal, Austria, Bavaria, and Spain, had determined at the Congress of Vienna on the restoration of the temporal dominions of the Pope. The conservatives of Europe, whether Catholic, Protestant, or schismatic, felt that while the states of the Church were preserved intact to the head of the Catholic religion, their own rights would remain unquestioned, that, to reach themselves, his rights should be first assailed. The atheistic conspiracy, guided now by old, experienced revolutionists, saw also that the conservatism of the world, which they had to destroy in order to dominate in its stead, could not be undermined without first taking away the foundation of Christian civilization upon which it rested, and which unquestionably, even for Christian schismatics and heretics, was the temporal and the spiritual authority of the Pope. Having no idea of a divine preservation of the Christian religion, they judged that the destruction of the temporal power would lead inevitably to the destruction of the spiritual, and as experience proved that it would be useless to attempt to destroy both altogether, they then set all their agencies at work to destroy the temporal power first. They, therefore, determined to create and ferment to the utmost extent a political discontent amongst the populations of the different states into which the Italian peninsula was divided. Now, this was a difficult task in the face of the experience which the Italian people had gained of the revolutions and constant political changes brought by the French from the first attempt of the Republic to the last of the Empire. The Congress of Vienna restored most of the ancient Italian states, as well as the states of the Church, to the legitimate rulers. Peace and prosperity beyond what had been known for years began to reign in the peninsula. The people in mass were profoundly contented. They were more Catholic than ever, notwithstanding all that the revolutionary agents of France did to pervert them. But there remained a dangerous fraction amidst the population not at all satisfied with the change which had so much improved the nation generally. This fraction consisted of those individuals and their children who benefited by the revolutionary regime. They were the men who made themselves deputies in Rome, Naples, and elsewhere, and by the aid of French revolutionary bayonets, seized upon church property and became enriched by public spoliation. These still remained revolutionary to the core. Then there was the interest effected by their party. And finally, there was that uneasy class, educated by the many cheap universities of the country in too great number, the sons of advocates and other professional men, who, tinged with liberalism, easily became the prey of the designing men who still remained addicted to the principles and were leagued in the secret organizations of Weishaupt and his fellow atheists. Even one of these youths, corrupted and excited to ambition by the adroit manipulation of these emissaries of Satan, still active, though more imperceptible than ever, would be sufficient to kindle a flame amongst his fellows, capable of creating a wide discontent. Aided then by such elements, already at hand for their purposes, Weishaupt and his hidden directory determined to kindle such a flame of revolution in Italy as, in its effects, should, before long, do more harm to religion and order than even the French Revolution had caused in its sanguinary but brief career. They effected this by the formation, on the darkest lines of illuminated Masonry, of the terrible sect of the Carbonari.